And then they started dunking me, pushing my head underwater constantly. It was like a bullying I couldn't believe. Some people say you're above your body. I was not above my body. I was behind my body.
Right. So you took these channeled sessions and put it into a book, and
Yes, except for Richard Lewis, that came after the book because he recently passed a few months ago. And
right.
within a week after he passed, I felt this energy in my room. I felt this bustling energy. And I just took the pen, and for some reason it was him. From what I read also, he was very close. He really liked Lenny Bruce, and he was
Hmm.
close to his daughter. So here I am, the one that saved his stuff. So I'm involved in all this.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today I have Linda Meris with us. She has had a near-death experience, or maybe multiple. We'll talk to her about that, but she also does channeling and I think all things spiritual. So we'll dig into all different things. But first of all, thank you so much, Linda, for jumping on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
I always start any episode with just asking a little bit about yourself in regards to what I would generally ask is if there was a point in your life when something shifted. Sometimes it is in your death experience. Sometimes it's a first spiritual experience. It could be a multiple things. But if you think about that moment and then you think of who Linda was before that, could I get a little information of who you were before that, how you were raised, or just some information on that?
Well, I believe my mom was open to all this stuff. She always liked to go on the Ouija board to see when I was going to get married.
Oh, wow.
She had this. She said I have feelings, so I got a feeling that she was into it, but she didn't really talk about it much because I believe in those days a lot of things weren't talked about
Mm,
or brought out, and I didn't think too much of it. When you're so young, you think it's part of life when these experiences happen. You don't know that they're unusual until you are older and you realize the paranormal and the spiritual, and that there was something there that was on you. It's so quite amazing that it was life changing. And I have to say that the recent channeling I had, or within a year or so ago, actually, the first channeling was started in 1978 when I saved the memorabilia of the late comedian Lenny Bruce.
mm,
And when that happened, I started actually channeling. I was open to psychometry. I was learning how to go about getting involved with all this. I was open. I think it was just living in Manhattan. So many experiences are out there, and I seem to walk right into them. And so I channeled Lenny, and I channeled for a year or so, and then he wanted a book. He wanted a book about what he was channeling, and so I didn't know what to do with it. I did After I channeled, I put the manuscript in storage because who was going to believe all this?
mm.
At that time, I just didn't know, and needed a lot of editing. It was my first automatic writing experience. And when I did take it out, because a friend of mine who wrote a book told me, said, I want to read your manuscript.
Mhm.
After reading my manuscript, she encouraged me to do something with it. She said, this is spiritually significant. Do something, do something. So I felt I needed to do that. And in my book, I explain that when I took this manuscript out of storage, my lights started blinking in my room. And it wasn't anything to do with the light. The door was closed, the windows weren't open, and my lights were blinking. And the super came up and said, there's nothing wrong with your lights, but I'll change them anyway. So
Mhm.
they shouldn't have been blinking. So, and then I said, this is probably it. And I had the book published over a year ago. It took a year to edit and do whatever I had to do. And another friend of mine said, you should include your experiences, your near death or unusual paranormal experiences, divine intervention actually was really divine intervention experiences. So I did that, and I realized I had a number of them, and they were the most unusual one, I think, is when I was at my local beach on Long Island. That's where I'm originally from. And I was about to jump off the float into the water. And these young fellers surrounded me, who I knew from school, and started tugging at my bathing suit, trying to pull it off. And then they started dunking me, pushing my head underwater constantly. It was like a bullying I couldn't believe. And to the point where I didn't have any strength to come up out of the water. When I looked up at the sky and I said, is this it for me? And to myself, in my inner voice, I said, is this it for me? And a voice said, no. And I saw my body. Some people say you're above your body. I was not above my body. I was behind my body, watching my arms move, not with my intention, but my arms move and my legs move, swimming to the shore, back to the shore. And as I felt, I said, this is unusual. But as a kid, I said, oh, maybe God is here and he just swimming me back to the shore. I didn't think it was any great big deal, except that I was saved, and it was unusual. As I said, I felt like I was in the backseat of a car, but I wasn't my car, and I wasn't the driver. And it was just like profound and miraculous. And you can't forget these things because they just stick in your mind.
How old were you at that time?
I was probably around 14, 15.
Oh, so you were pretty young when that
Yeah, I
first
was really
experience
young.
happened.
Yeah, yeah, really, really young. And my mom was at the beach, and I didn't want to say anything to her. At that time, I didn't want to speak up. I didn't want to cause a big deal. And I just let it go. But it was definitely not my time. I mean,
Right.
I know other people, someone told me, he said he was driving and on a highway, and a car, I think he was out in California, and a car was coming really fast, and it was definitely going to hit him. They couldn't get out of the way. This car was out of control. He said all of a sudden, the car that was going to hit him slowed down and slowly went past them. And then they remembered slowly moving on, as if like a whole scenario, just like slow motion. It was incredible. He said, I'll never forget that. I said, you're talking to me after what I've been through.
Right.
So I've had this amazing experience. I call if there's a movie on my life, I would call it Within Seconds, because everything just was just in time. Like saving Lenny's memorabilia from going in the garbage. That was one garbage bag away. I was there on a day off from work that I usually don't take off, payday. And there I was. And the porter, whoever he was, let me go into the apartment and tell me that I could take this stuff, the memorabilia of Lenny Bruce. His daughter lived on my block. There's a story about that. So he said, come here tomorrow morning and I'll help you bring these things up to your apartment. He could have said, who are you? So, or kept it or whatever. And a lot of people say, Linda, most people probably either would have dumped it or sold it or whatever. I said, well, that's a horrible thing to do. That would have been horrible, absolutely a disaster.
Right.
And I had these things in my apartment for 2 weeks. and I found a way to send it back to the daughter. Send a whole 165 pounds of paper back
Mm.
to Hawaii
Oh,
through a
wow.
neighbor next door to me who helped me. It was just, everything was just in time or within seconds. That's been my life in that respect.
So it's almost in divine, right? Everything just kind of made sense. And I think a lot of us can look at our life like that. There's times where we go, wow, that was good timing. Yours seems like it happens quickly, and then it just, if you like you said, if you would have not, if you would have waited any longer, that would have been gone, right? And then now
Exactly.
and that was before you did the channeling, right? This was before the channeling started.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
correct? So
The
okay.
channeling started after the material was out of my apartment.
Right. Okay.
And I just put my hand to the paper. I just even know what I was doing. It was just something that I just did.
So the incident that happened at age 14, is that what you considered your near death, or was there something else later on in life that happened? Was that your
Um, oh, there was one earlier.
Oh, there was one earlier as
There was
well.
one earlier. Yes. I was like 6 years old. My brother was 12. We went to go see Santa Claus, who was going to land in a helicopter in a parking lot in our hometown.
Hmm.
So we were there, and I remember my brother holding my hand, clutching it tightly, and we got in the crowd. There were people behind us that quickly came behind us, and many in front. And we were waiting for Santa Claus to land. As Santa Claus, I believe, landed, because I couldn't see that far away, we were in the middle of the crowd. All of a sudden, people started going crazy. They started pushing forward, and people in back, front. And my brother lost my hand, and I lost my brother in the crowd. I'm 6 years old, uh, and I realized that people were I was gonna be stampeded. I don't, nobody saw this little girl in the crowd. I was about to go right to the ground. Here we go, within seconds. When I looked up and I saw, which was the most amazing thing, half the people in front of me walked to the left, the other half to the right. The people behind me, I didn't feel or anything. All I know is, oh, I can get out over here. And I went out. My brother was waiting for me. He had no idea what was going on. And we just got a glimpse of Santa on our way out of there. But there was no reason for people to move that way. There was no
Hmm.
problem, no emergency. In fact, it would made more sense for people to keep moving towards the helicopter to a certain point, I guess, not to move out of the crowd. Why
Right.
would they move out of the crowd? Move that way, unless there was an emergency.
Right.
Everybody out, or something like that.
Hmm.
That didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, it was almost like a parting of the sea, so you could get through.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So when this happened, I was again as a child. Oh, it happened. Oh, here's a way out.
Hmm.
I didn't connect the dots to divine intervention.
Right. Yeah,
I was
because
too
at six
little.
years old, you're just living your day to day. You're not really thinking about that kind of stuff. It just kind of,
No,
yeah.
absolutely not. And
Yeah.
and what's amazing is that I remember them. I remember the
Hmm.
incidents. I remember them. And I've had more. And it's just, as I even got older, I said, "Oh, that's unusual." And I just said, "Wow, coincidence."
Right.
I didn't think of saying divine intervention then, but then when I got older and I was putting the stories together, I said, "Wow, this has to be something else."
Hmm.
And I put the stories in the book and the channeling, which is really his wisdom, his mistakes in his past life, which he had a lot of tumult. He was thrown off stage, and I didn't even know much about Lenny. I had to read after I channeled. I had to read more about him to know who this guy was.
Hmm.
I knew of him, but I didn't know that we knew each other in past lives. I didn't know Richard Lewis, and here I am channeling these people.
Yeah. So you have this young experience when you're 6 years old. Then later on around 13, 14, I think you said at 14, you had that close call because and I've heard of this happening with people where friends, especially at certain ages, they get a little carried away and the next thing you know, someone's in trouble and you could have drowned, right? And you popped not out of your body and looked down, but you were behind yourself and you were aware of yourself. Did it feel at that moment, did it feel as real? Can you recall it feeling as real as this? Did it feel just as real when you had that moment? Or was there something
Um,
different about it?
what was different about it, I was not willing my arms and legs to move, to swim. It's
Mm,
like somebody took over my body, something or spirit took over my body, and I was just like for the ride and behind watching it.
mm.
It's so hard to it's hard to really explain, but
Is
I
it like
was there.
watching a movie or just being aware of it?
I was, yeah, it was like here's my legs, my feet. I was behind my feet, and I'm looking at my body, watching my body swim, but I had no will to do it.
Mm.
It was just my somebody. I believe I spirit took over, pushed me aside, and did the swimming. That's what I really feel.
Okay. So these experiences turned something on in you, it almost seemed. And when did the channeling, like what age did the channeling start happening? And how did that, were you a little bit afraid of it at first, or what was your feelings
Well,
towards it?
it started happening after I got the materials of Lenny out of my apartment, the actual automatic writing. But psychometry was something that came um, a little before and after. I went to a fair of some sort, and it was all different kinds of spiritual seminars. And there was one on psychometry, which I don't know why it interested me, but I started taking classes with a couple who gave the classes. And I remember people telling me I was getting them accurate. Like it was accurate what I had told them. And I kept practicing. And then I was invited to do weekends up in upstate and hotels, comedy clubs. And I started doing shows around it. I would hold personal objects. People would give me, usually I tell people to give me something that's metal because it's very sensitive.
Mhm.
And I would hold the objects and I would get impressions, whether it's clairaudience, clairsentience, clairvoyance. And I would tell people what I received. And usually it was in a upbeat way, especially if I'm in a comedy club in an audience, you don't want to be too serious because this stuff could be startling to people.
Oh, yes.
So
Yeah.
in order to offset people being kind of chilled from all this is to have humor.
Hmm.
Do it with humor.
Right.
And I recently did a show over a week ago upstate, and just what that's just what happened. People were laughing, they enjoyed it because of the humor around it. Somehow it just came together, and I'm off doing that again. I joined a comedy group, and we should be performing by next month, and my show will be part of it.
You're right about the fact that a lot of topics over spirituality can become almost scary for some people, especially if people aren't ready for it.
Yes.
So if you add humor to it, it almost allows people in a more comfortable way.
Mm-hmm.
And they can kind of then start to understand it a little bit more, right? Because not everybody's at that same place. I've learned that over the years. I always felt like growing up, I would start talking to friends about things, and I feel like we were in a different they'd look at me like, "Are you okay? Like, what are you talking about? Let's talk about, the football game. Like, what's going on here?" So I had to learn different ways of kind of approaching things. So using humor is great. And so you developed this young, and it was a constant in your life.
The psychometry came about, I would say, in the late, probably 80s, maybe part of I think in the 80s. Um, More or less, more so after I did the automatic writing when I put it away, not
Mhm.
knowing what to do with it. or who would believe me. You still have the skeptics. Luckily, with all the paranormal shows now on cable or whatnot, many people, these shows wouldn't be continuing if people didn't watch them.
Right.
So that's fortunate in my favor. And and many people like me, there are people like me that have these experiences. And some people just want to ignore them or don't want to talk about them. Because again, they're afraid no one would believe them, that they were off the rocker or whatnot. But they happen. I remember a friend of mine who was driving in a car with his friend on a dark country road, and they saw looked like a mother and a child on the road. So they gave him a lift. They were very quiet in the back seat, and then I believe they might have showed them where they wanted to be left off, and they let them out of the car. And after they left, they turned around to look, make sure they were okay. They weren't there. They weren't there.
Wow.
This one also. This one was pretty recent for me. This I couldn't believe. I believe that it was like the way it was because it happened. I was in my local post office, and I'm going to my post office box, and then there's woman standing there, like to the side, not directly in front of my post office box, but to the side of it, a little ways back, of course, for me to get into my post office box. She wasn't doing anything but standing there. I opened my post office box and I close it, just starting to leave. And she looked at me, she said, "You left something." So I looked at her, I said, "What?" So I opened the post office box, and sure enough, on the top, there was a card stuck in the metal piece on the top that I didn't see.
Oh, wow.
And it was a very important piece of paper. The information was important. And I put in my bag, I turned around, she was gone. Now, when she was standing there, she was not going in her pocketbook, doing anything related to the post office. There was no one in her way to go to a clerk because I was observing all this. She was just standing there.
Right.
As if like she was meant to be there to give me a message. These are things that happen. You can't fake this stuff. It's there.
Yeah, and I think probably, the biggest thing I'm getting out of talking to so many people, especially as of late, is the more you open yourself up to these things, the more open you are to receiving things. So, there's a lot of people in this life that don't experience anything, but they've never opened themselves up to it. And the moment you open that up, you got to, be ready for what you'll receive, right? Because like you were seeing, almost like it's the same sense where I've talked to people who've had, a car accident, and someone comes and takes them out of the car, and the ambulance shows up, and they say, "How'd you get out of the car?" Or what, I don't, so this person took me out. Which person? The person's gone, like, it doesn't,
Uh-huh.
what
Guardian
person in
angels
their right
popping
mind
in.
would just pull someone out of a car and take off? I mean, that doesn't make, usually you'd sit around and make sure that they're going to be okay. So you hear about these things all the time, and we can't explain it, but it happens, and it's pretty remarkable. So one of the questions I ask a lot of guests is if there was ever a time in their life where they feared what comes after this life, or if you always just had an inclination there was something more. Did you always feel there was something more coming?
After all my experiences, I definitely feel there's something more. It's part of the channeling I received from Lenny about how spirits manifest and how they are in the spirit world. So he does a whole piece on that.
Wow.
There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom, and he weaves in and out of his past life about his mistakes and horrible things that happen, and then about his spiritual place right now that's in a good place. So I say people should read my book, even if you don't know who Lenny is, just to get the spiritual information, because now his words are open. He could say what he wants to say,
Mhm.
and that's the good part.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, that would be the interesting thing about channeling. I haven't really dug into the channeling thing. You're the first guest I've had on that spoke about channeling, and I've had some people reach out that want to be on the show that do channeling, and it's an area that I am not as familiar with.
Mhm.
But the further down the rabbit hole I go with talking to people, I go, I feel like anything is possible anymore. And you're right. If you're channeling someone or someone who has been here, then yeah, you would be gaining a lot of spiritual wisdom through that person. You know, it's not even your higher self, it's you're tapping into some other energy.
And you know it by the syntax, how the wording changes, the language is different. It's not
Mhm.
you speaking. Like the recent Richard Lewis channeling, it was brief. He used a word that I never used in my life. I didn't even know it was actually used.
Hmm.
And it was unfamiliar. The wording was done on not the way I speak. I knew it wasn't me. And that's how I detect, authenticity too, even in my own channeling. So I want to make sure I'm with the up and up on all this.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably skepticism that even happens to the person that's going through the channeling until you go, okay, I can't explain this away. This is not me speaking. This isn't coming from me, right? So you took these channeled sessions and put it into a book and
Yes, except for Richard Lewis, that came after the book because he recently passed a few months ago. And
right.
within a week after he passed, I felt this energy in my room. I felt this bustling energy. And I just took the pen, and for some reason it was him. But from what I read also, he was very close. He really liked Lenny Bruce, and he was
Hmm.
close to his daughter. So here I am, the one that saved his stuff. So I'm involved in all this. And I also saw a vision. I saw the vision of Freddie Prinze, the actor comedian, many years ago. I was in a comedy club, just going to the bar area. The show was going on, and all of a sudden I noticed that all the people in the bar that were standing in the bar area walked out of the bar. The people at the bar on bar stools, all of a sudden, after the people left the bar, and I looked again, the show was still going on. The people at the bar simultaneously, like it was coordinated like a dance, um, turned around and faced the bartender. I think there were three or four stools. I forgot about that, but at least three. And to my left, all of a sudden, the Freddie, because it looked like Freddie Prinze, because he had passed within a week ago. He appears to me all in white, ethereal, and I'm looking at him. I'm like stunned, and he points to his photo on the wall, saying, shook his head, yes, and smiled at me and kept looking at me. So I said, wait a minute. I didn't drink anything. I don't take drugs. I said, maybe this is psychological. The guy passed away. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. Something just was weird. And I kept looking, and he looked at me, and I said, I'm getting out of here. Started walking out of the club, turned around, and he was still looking at me. He was still there.
Wow.
I go home. Before I woke up, I hear, put on America, the album America, an old album, America, Pigeon Song. So I put on Pigeon Song, which was the last song on the second side of the album. And it was symbolic of his life. The first line was, I had a pigeon by the name of Fred, but I done shot him in the head. I mean, it
Hmm.
goes on and on. And he looked just like him, all in white. And what got me the most was that he was still standing there when I was leaving, like he was leaning against the wall or something, watching, looking into the room where people were performing, as if he were hanging out in that room waiting to go on or something. I know he
Right.
performed there. It was a club called Catch a Rising Star in
Oh, okay.
Manhattan. Yeah. And I just went to hang out. Um, I was doing some comedy of my own. I was more of a comedic actress. And as I said before, I joined the group. We should be in a show by September. And I will incorporate my psychometry show. And these are things are going on. I never know the next day, the next minute, something could occur.
Did people around you know this was happening, or was this something you had to deal with personally?
Oh, I think I might have told one friend who was open to paranormal parapsychology. Because on a weekend when I did my show, I've been booked in different places.
Hmm.
I met somebody who was also a channeler and kept in touch for a little bit. And other people, mostly not, because at that time, the, the 80s, late 70s, 80s, even part of the 90s, it wasn't something like he talked about much.
Right, exactly.
It, I mean, we had people like Ruth Montgomery, who was a political columnist who channeled people, about Edgar Casey and all these people, the
Hmm.
Seth books, but there was certain audience.
Hmm.
Now it's more open.
What is the name of the book that you put all this
Hypo-
into?
Hypocrisy versus mysticism, wisdom, and morality.
Hmm.
And I tell people you can go on Amazon and just look up hypocrisy versus mysticism, and you'll find the book under my name, Mom on the cover, Linda
Hmm.
Meris, Meris. And it's for people who are open to the paranormal.
Hmm.
And if a skeptic wants to read my book, just get the wisdom. If you don't believe in a lot of this stuff, get the wisdom of what he was telling us. And it's it's an eye opener. It's impactful. It's a quick read, powerful, unusual channeling. He weaves in and out of his past life and present spiritual realm.
Did the experiences in your life, whether it's the NDE and the channeling, do you find that really shaped your life?
I feel that at that time when I was channeling the book, I don't know if it was changing my life. I was just in that place doing
Hmm.
it. Excuse me, doing it. But after that, when I put it in storage, I kind of like let it go and did the psychometry. So the
Hmm.
psychometry was more in my life at that time for a
Okay.
number of years. And yeah, and it's now it's back in a part of my life again because I did my show recently upstate and people were laughing,
Mhm.
but yet I was giving readings.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way to do it. And I guess what I meant too was even the 14-year-old experience you had, that's quite an experience to happen at such a young age. And I would think that it would shift something to question some things in life. Some people go through their life without any feeling of what's next. They're just living by the seat of their pants. They're just like
Right.
going, 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 living hard, living fast. And I always wonder about people who've had an experience either young or at any age, if it makes you kind of like step back from them and go, what was that? What am I doing? Like that's the personality I have. Not everybody has that. I would always question things. But did that happen, or were you just kind of like, it was probably just whatever. And you didn't really think much about it till later?
um I no I kept it in my mind, but I didn't overthink it
Hmm.
and just live my life doing other things. I was like the 60s kid. I was like the music. I like going to Woodstock and being around folky people. And I was been in the chorus. I was. well, so far with Pete Seeger's, who started a chorus called the New York City Street Singers, and then a jazz chorus, um, and from the late Barry Harris. Um, so I'm still in their choir, chorus, whatnot, and I just did other things, acting, and and this comes back because I got that manuscript out of storage and did what I did. It came back.
Right.
It's like here I am again. So it's both.
No, that's all amazing. You mentioned earlier that you have videos of channeling. Is that how do people connect with you if they want to connect with you? I'm just curious. Is it through like a
Oh,
channel you have?
I have a Facebook page called Meris The Sea, a sea of hope.
Okay.
Meris, MERIS, the SEA, a sea of hope. And they can go to that site on Facebook, friend me, whatnot, and go to that site and message me if they care to.
One of the final questions I generally ask everybody is why you feel human existence is here. Why do we embody ourselves on this and incarnate on this earth? Why do we come here? What is our what is the reason?
Well, from what I channel is that it's like going from kindergarten to college, learning experience. We need to keep reincarnating to excel. And it's to be more in the loving stage, to be in a higher angelic kind of force that we want to create. And it's it's explained in the book more than I know, be honest with you.
Hmm.
And to be really honest with you, I have to reread the book. I have to reread my own book
Right.
because it's like I'm definitely reading someone else's writing.
See, again, I'm going to jump in and just say, my girlfriend, for instance, she knows my music better than me sometimes. She'll be singing my song and I'll be like, I don't remember my own song. And I have to go back and look at my lyrics again and say, what was I saying? Oh, right. Okay. And then I have to redo it. I have to re-listen to it because as much as I'd love to take all the credit, I don't know sometimes where the words have come from. And that's when you just said it the way you said it, it just feels similar in a sense. And I
Mm-hmm.
and then it makes me wonder how many songwriters are out there writing music
Mm-hmm.
and it's not even about them. It's something higher than themselves or bigger than themselves and they're just putting the pen to the paper and then they're releasing the music, right? So it's
I
the
want to
same.
hear your music.
Yeah,
I want
well,
to
it's
hear you now.
yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's just the way you're saying it in regards to channeling.
Uh-huh.
It's funny how I can relate to that in music writing. I never would have put that together until the way you've been explaining it. So I appreciate that. And I also like how you said it's almost like college, like it's excelling, it's trying to learn to love better. You did mention just a little bonus last question here. You did mention the reincarnate. You said
Mm-hmm.
that. Did you get any feeling over the time that you've channeled or any feelings that reincarnation is a thing like we do have
Well,
multiple lives?
all I can tell you from the book, Lenny said we knew each other in past lives, but he left this life too. His life was too short for us to have met. I was still in school when he was alive, so
Right.
in Long Island. So uh, I don't know in this life how I know him in past lives. I can't remember the past lives, but I just know that there's a reason that I was the one to do what I did.
Right.
And why me? Why me? Why not someone he knew well? Someone who uh, you can't. It's hard to understand why.
My feeling right away just came to me that there's no bias. You didn't know his life, but you were able to
Uh,
channel it. So someone who's in someone's life could interpret things in a different way. So
and
it's
there was
interesting.
nothing in the memorabilia that I had in my apartment that relates anything to my book of the afterlife
Mm,
because I skimmed through some things. I was so nervous and worried about getting the stuff back to his daughter, and that somebody be pounding on my door or something, because I had this person's um, his court transcripts up my kitchen wall. I have pictures of that. I have pictures of pictures. And he had reel-to-reel tapes. I didn't have a reel-to-reel tape recorder at that time, so I didn't listen to his tapes. I didn't read all the way through scripts. I hardly skimmed through. I skimmed through stuff. I was so nervous and anxious that I just said, "Oh my God, I don't want anything to happen to this stuff." I was protective at the same time. I was nervous. So nothing in my apartment relates to the channeling that I did.
I want to just say thank you so much for sharing your story. I want to encourage the audience to check out your book. I'm going to check it out, and I want to check out your videos and things like that. Because again, this I always say it, and this is why at the beginning I said I didn't really check too much into you, because I like to learn it as I go, and it's fascinating.
Mhm.
And it just gives more proof that we continue beyond this life, and that there's a lot more going on than we're led to believe or that we see. So be aware. And it seems like even though you did have a few moments where it's like when you said you saw Freddie and you kind of were like, I'm out of here, I'm leaving the club. There was a little fear there, but it didn't overtake you to a point where you weren't allowing yourself to do what you were doing, and you still honored it and channeled years later. So
Well, it didn't pop in front of me where I was by myself. I was Lisa, even though the people went out of the. I think he set up the whole thing.
mm,
The fact that the people left the club, the people at the bar turned around. I think he set it up to appear to me.
right.
It's bizarre, but that's what happened.
To make it more comfortable of an experience, it wasn't something that was going to make you running down the street because you were by yourself or scared of it.
No,
But
no.
it
So
was
I
a
wasn't
yeah.
scared. But it was weird. I said, "Come on," and I saying, I always think everything was psychological. At that point, I would say psychological this, psychological that, but then
Yeah.
it got too much. It was parapsychological.
Yeah, absolutely.
It
No,
was true. It happened, and therefore it is.
yeah. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate being on the show. I always, and obviously to the audience, please continue to like, share, and subscribe to The Soul Inspired so I can keep getting amazing guests like Linda Maris on. I appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing your story and your experiences.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So